Welcome to the Kolbecast, episode 143. Thank you for joining us. Our own Jordan Almanzar was recently a guest of Soren Schwab on CLT's Anchored podcast. Feeling a bit left out, we invited Soren to the Kolbecast, who joins us today. Soren shares his story from growing up in Germany to his current role with CLT. He also provides great insights into how standardized testing influences what is taught in schools, the hope of education in our country, and much more. We hope that you'll enjoy the show.
Hi there, I'm Bonnie, liturgical musician, popcorn and podcast fanatic, and Kolbe homeschooling mom to 4 lads and lasses of middle and high school age.
And this is Stephen, homeschooling father of 5 and director of development for Kolbe Academy.
And I'm Jordan. As a product of homeschooling, I'm proud to teach Greek and Latin for Kolbe online and serve as the Alumni and Public Relations Director.
Hi Jordan, how is your pot of coffee? Do you have that with you today?
I have it like always. I always bring a pot of coffee up here, so it's still nice and hot.
Excellent. Mine is all gone already. Very sad. Oh well. Oh well. How about you, Stephen? How are you and your people doing?
Well, we're on our second pot of coffee here because my son, my mother, and I all drink coffee and we're together this morning. So it's on to pot number 2.
Okay. All right. It's a good morning for that. We're joined today by Soren Schwab, Vice President of Partnerships for Classic Learning Test, more commonly referred to around here as CLT. He and Jordan recently had a great conversation on CLT's podcast, Anchored. Today, Soren is joining us on the Kolbecast. Hello, how's your coffee situation?
Thanks for having me. It's great. Yeah, I stayed up a little late watching football last night, so I think I'm on cup 4 or so.
Okay.
Yeah, doing well. Appreciate you all having me.
Oh, I've been looking forward to it. Thanks so much for coming to visit with us. I understand you are from Germany and have quite the background in classical education, which we don't normally put those two together, right? So at the risk of having you repeat yourself, would you tell us the story of how you ended up in the United States doing what you're doing now?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to. Yeah, I grew up in Germany, like you said, born and raised. I don't have American relatives or so English is actually my third language. I learned French first because I grew up right on the border to France in a small town called Zweibrücken, deux ponts, 2 bridges, translated, and so French, French border, I could literally walk to from my house, and so that was the first language that I learned. And I'm 36, so I'm an 80s child, and I like to say I'm the MTV generation, and so it was around that time that MTV started, when they still had music, I guess. And so I've always been kind of interested initially with American culture, and then later on with American history and literature. But I went to school. We don't have K-12. It looks a little bit different. Jordan knows a lot more about that. But I went to gymnasium, which is the track, so to speak, that students take that want to go to university. And kind of from early on, I always liked coaching. I was a team handball player, and was always a kind of a coach or an assistant coach. So I always loved kind of working with other players, and then kind of tutoring on the side a little bit here and there. So I always felt a calling to be a teacher, and so I applied to university after finishing my Abitur, and as many Germans do, I picked the one that's closest to my house because there's not really this idea of like, oh, there's this prestigious university, or I really want to get into this school. It's, do they have the major that I want? And in this case, I wanted to be an English and religion teacher, and so the Saarland University.
Mainz or Bonn?
Actually, I got into Mainz, which, hindsight, there are so many things I probably would have done differently, but I did get into Mainz, which is, of course, the birthplace of Gutenberg. But I didn't, because that was an hour away, and I didn't want to go quite that far away. So I went to Saarland University, which, if our listeners know anything about the Saarland, that was pretty much the state that go back and forth between France and Germany. And so that was only like 25 minutes away. I could take the train while I could still play team handball back home. It was not a residential campus. And so I would really just go take a class and then go home. And so very different experience than probably most Americans have, even though maybe we can talk about that later on, but it seems like even American universities are kind of heading in that direction, unfortunately. And so I started university there. We don't have the typical kind of bachelor's and master's system, but it was a Grundstudium, and then I guess the Hauptstudium would be your master's. So the Grundstudium is kind of your basic studies, so kind of like a bachelor's. It takes a little bit less because we don't have to take any core curriculum classes. So you go right into your major. So it only took about 2.5 years, and so I got my quote unquote bachelor's at that point. Now, I wanted to be an English teacher, and if you want to be an English teacher in Germany, you have to go abroad. They make you go abroad, especially if you want to teach at the highest level at the gymnasium. And so it was about 2008, 2009. I started looking around. What could I do? I mean, the options are really limitless. You can go to Australia and do a work and travel. You can get a job somewhere and do that for 6 months. But it was around that time that I took a really interesting class at university, and it was I think it was Huckleberry Finn and its impact on American literature and culture. And really before that, I mean, at that point, I was still quote unquote speaking British English, because that's what I learned. I learned about Mr. Flanders, who has a flat and drives a car in London, and you take your Shakespeare class and whatnot. And so, but I took that American literature class, and it just, for me at least, it kind of changed everything. I learned a lot about American culture, American history, the centrality of that novel, of course. And so I thought, maybe I can go abroad to the US. And there were about, I think, 6 or 7 kind of sister schools that my university had. And some of them were Missouri, Boise State, I think University of New Brunswick in Canada, a couple other, I think Oklahoma State. Now, I'm attending a really large public research university, like 20,000 students. I was just a number, right? I still remember my matriculation number. That's how you were known, by your matriculation number. Professor comes in with a microphone and lectures to 400 people and then leaves, never to be seen again, because he just does research, doesn't really care about the teaching. And so all these schools seem to be the same, these big universities. And so there was one school on the list that I've never heard about. It's called Hillsdale College. And so I threw my hat in there, and I threw my hat in a few other ones because I wasn't sure what my chances would be, but turns out God had a plan for me, and I was accepted to Hillsdale College just for an exchange year. So it was really just 1 year, go abroad, take some classes. Doesn't matter what grades you're going to get, just don't fail. And after 1 year, you just come back, and then you essentially go into your master's studies. And well, my mom likes to remind me, I've always been bad at math, and so 1 year turned into now 11, I think, and I'm still in the United States. But that's really kind of that how I ended up in the U.S. in the first place.
Yeah, I remember one time talking with you, Soren. You were talking about was there some kind of handball connection in the U.S. as well? Like, was that all in Germany?
No, that was all in Germany. Unfortunately, now I live close to DC, and so there are some team handball clubs, but I feel like I'm too old now. It's kind of it's a physical sport, and so, but no, and unfortunately there wasn't. And funny thing, and your listeners might know that when they hear handball, a lot of people think of the sport that's kind of like racquetball or squash, I think. And not the team handball that I played. So I usually have to tell people, no, it's the Olympic sport where you dribble the ball like in basketball, but you try to score a goal like in soccer. And so it's kind of a blend between the two.
And it's huge in Germany too. I mean, it's on television. It's probably, what would you say, third most popular, or fourth?
Yeah, it's the second, even though for some reason American football is getting up there.
It is with Ran, R-A-N.
Yeah.
You watch that with Iggy, that guy with the
I sure do. And my family, it's something we can bond over. My mom doesn't care, but my dad and my brother's a Kansas City Chief fan, and I'm an Eagles fan. So
yes,
they do. And it's pretty intense, but handball still is. It's just unfortunately never made it to the US, and the World Cup just happened, and the US actually made it to the World Cup, I think, for the first time, but it just hasn't gotten the traction. But then again, you go to Germany and ask anyone about baseball and they just shake their heads. So it just might be a country thing.
I think there was you had in a previous conversation. I think I remember you talking about how there was some sort of sponsor in the US that helped you stay longer or something like that. Could you talk about that a little bit? Yeah,
I'd be happy to. And so, as I mentioned, the idea was for it to just be 1 year exchange year, and it was free. Someone paid for it, right? I know that now, having been immersed in American culture and in capitalism. Someone obviously paid for it, but it was free for me, and I mean they had to, right? Because university is free in Germany, and so no one would want to do an exchange year if they had to pay tuition. Of course, I had to pay for my flight and everything else, but and so that was just that 1 year. Well, I was blissfully naive going in. I mean, I knew some things about American college. I quite frankly didn't quite know what GPA meant. Or I mean, I heard about the A, B, C, D, F kind of structure, but this was my year to just honestly have fun, go abroad, make some connections, make some friends. Of course, learn the language better and more intimately. I mean, at that point, I think my accent was still pretty strong, like this, when I first came to the US. And so, I was going in and like, I'm going to get rid of my accent and it's going to be great. After about one semester, I did pretty well. I don't remember what my GPA was, but again, I had no expectations. And so there were a few professors that came up to me and said, hey, have you thought about potentially staying longer? And at that point, really, I just, something started to click for me about just the value of education, the purpose of education. And I thought, wow, that I would love to stay longer, but I could never afford that. I mean, we didn't have, you don't have like college savings in Germany. And so my parents were middle class, upper middle class. We did fine, but there was no way for me to finance that. And so I started to frequently visit the financial aid office and a guy named Rich Mogenberg, good German name. And we bonded over soccer, even though I don't even like soccer that much. I didn't tell him that, but he loved it. And we had conversations about that. And so I think had I gone to, Boise State, Michigan State, any of these schools, there's no way I would have gotten the kinds of scholarships that I got, right? Because they're public universities, but he'll still be in a private school. They felt like I was a good fit for the college. They knew after my first semester that I could do the coursework, and then they did everything they could to keep me. And I could not be more grateful. And so I got a scholarship because I was an international student. I got a scholarship because of my grades. But it still wasn't quite enough. And so I kept talking to Mr. Mogenberg, and he said, I'm going to make some calls. And this guy, I mean, he's amazing. He ends up calling some local folks in Hillsdale, and he finds this one family. I think Susie and Mark were their names, and they were in their 70s at that point, lived in Hillsdale, and we're just loved the college. And so they ended up paying, I think, $2,500 every semester for the next 2 years, so that I could attend Hillsdale College. And I can't thank them enough. I mean, it was just, just folks that wanted to do some good in the community and let a German stay at Hillsdale. And so, it was really a life-changing experience, and couldn't have done it without Susie and Mark.
So from Hillsdale to where you are now, what's the rest of the story?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because you would think, oh, you went to Hillsdale. Obviously, you're immersed in classical education. I didn't really know what classical education was. The term classical education itself, the word classical has kind of been added on the last few decades, right? It was just called education. That's about it. Jeremy, our boss, likes to say, that now I go to supermarkets and they call everything they call it organic milk. Well, it was called milk for a long time until they start putting garbage in it. And I think that's the same with education. And so I wasn't really aware of classical education. Unfortunately, I wasn't even aware of the liberal arts. And granted, I grew up in Germany, right? I mean, Greece is not that far away. Rome is not that far away, but I was not familiar with it at all. I mean, it is so utilitarian. Everything is just, you do this so you can get something out of it, right? You have to take this class, you get this paper so you can go to the next. I never thought of education as anything enriching, anything forming me or my soul and my heart. That completely changed at Hillsdale, right? Where even though I complained at first, I had to take classes. I had to, right? I had to take, art history class, a philosophy class, a psychology class. Now, of course, 10 years later, I'm so grateful. And now I always say I get to, right? Students get to take these classes. But it was unfathomable for me in Germany to take a class that was outside of my major. It wouldn't have been possible, right? You can't. Why would you? It doesn't serve a purpose. And so Hillsdale really put me kind of on a different trajectory where I start thinking about education differently. I did some student teaching while I was there. It was not required, but I really wanted to. And that was at a charter school, local charter school in Hillsdale. And so I think at that point, I still felt like I probably would go back to Germany. Ultimately, I didn't think any American school would hire me to teach English. I mean, it's not my first language. Why would they hire me? But I talked to some professors, talked to some school leaders, and they said, I think you have something to offer. And maybe your English isn't perfect yet, but you're really good at explaining it because you understand the grammar. You actually learned the grammar. A lot of Americans don't get taught grammar anymore. And so I'm like, wait,
Yeah.
what? Why wouldn't you? Right. And so now, of course, the knowledge that I have now, I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. I guess I can explain the predicate nominative. Most Americans don't even know that's a thing. And so they said, well, why don't you apply for some jobs? And in fact, every February, Hillsdale hosts what is called a classical job fair, where dozens and dozens of classical schools come to campus at Hillsdale to interview juniors and seniors that want to go into teaching. And so I thought, oh, all right, well, that sounds like I would do that. And so they prep you really well in your resume and do some sample interviews with you. And so I think it was 2012 in February, I wore my one suit that I owned and I interviewed with dozens of schools. And I think it went pretty well and I had a few options. But there was a school in Colorado Springs, a charter school, classical charter school called the Vanguard School, that took a chance on me, and so I accepted that job in, I think, April 2012. They did fly me out to Colorado, and I did a sample lesson and saw the beautiful mountains that reminded me of the Alps, and so there was a little bit of that. It was a little bit like Germany, and so in 2012 fall, I started teaching full time at a classical charter school. And so I started to have kind of the philosophical background at Hillsdale, and then I got to teach at a classical school in Colorado Springs for a while.
Yeah, I want to ask you a little bit about you said you had never thought of education as enriching. And when I went to Germany, it was for graduate school. I mean, it was for a PhD. So it was, of course, everybody was just hyper focused on a very narrow area. But I met a lot of the what we would call undergrads, but the 20-year-olds and all of that. And from what I gathered, we never made it with my own children into the gymnasium period. We left before that. In gymnasium, do they start focusing you in a narrow area even then? Like you're going to go into what we would call like a STEM subject or something, and then from there you go to your university studies. And isn't there a gap there too, like a civil service year type thing before that? So the students, what I'm getting at kind of too is that you didn't live on campus, and also I lived on campus in a house with these undergrads, as you would call them, with a bunch of them when I was doing my PhD. But there was no party school. Like it wasn't, they were a little older, and they were there for a very serious reason in their minds. Right. And so everybody was just kind of focused on their area academically. Can you talk a little bit about that experience, like that process, gymnasium to that major, and then, how that works?
Yeah, no, that's Jordan, you're spot on. And it's not much different for undergrad, unfortunately. I really wish it were. And that's why I said earlier, I really hope the US can kind of learn from that and not go in that direction, but I think we're already there. And so even in gymnasium, so gymnasium starts in 5th grade. So you do your elementary school, and then you go, either to a track that leads you more towards a trade school, or a track that leads you more towards where you can pursue nursing or social work, where you don't have to go to a university for 4 years, but still requires some further studies. And then you have the gymnasium from 5th to 12th, 13th. Actually, I had 13 years, and then you go to university. But even there, Jordan, it started in 11th grade, I believe it was. So in 10th grade, you have to decide what focus you want, 11th, 12th, and 13th grade. And so now you can't just say, I want to just study, chemistry, biology, and physics. There has to be a certain combination of subject that you can choose, but you essentially select majors. And so I remember I was an English, German, and chemistry major, because you couldn't. I would have loved to take 3. I would have loved to take English, German, and Spanish, but you can't do that. They make you, if you do 2 languages, you have to take a science, or if you take 2 social studies, you have. So there are some limitations there, but and then those subjects you have 5 times a week, and then there are other subjects like math you still have to take, but only 3 times a week. And so there's already a specialization based on your plan after graduation. So I did that. And then at that point, when you then apply to university, which is a little bit different. And so I remember teaching seniors, and they talked about senioritis and all these things. And I thought, what does that mean? And it was explained to me. And I thought, wow, that is so fundamentally different, because in Germany, your Abitur is at the absolute culmination of your, schooling, or your education, even though it certainly feels like schooling. And so, you finish all your classes. And then in your 3 major subjects, you have 3 5-hour exams. And then depending on your combination, so I had German, English, and chemistry. Well, there was no social studies in there. And so I had to do a 1-hour oral examination, either geography or history. So I did history. So, in college, they talk about, pardon my language, hell week, right? When you're like, oh my God, I have exams and finals. Well, okay, please. That was pretty, and the major difference is that these make up for, I think, 70 or 80% of your final GPA, so to speak. And so you cannot slack until you have, so to speak, that paper, which is a little bit different from here, where pretty much senior year is like, once you get accepted, you kind of coast. So actually, one thing I do appreciate about the German education system, but once you pass, you get your for us, it's an NC, a numerus clausus. It's essentially your GPA. Then you use that to apply to university. Well, you don't really apply to the university. You apply to a field of study within the university, a subject. And so I didn't apply to Saarland University. I applied to essentially to be an English and religion teacher at the University of Saarland. And so there's not like, did you get into University of Saarland? It's, did you make the NC, the GPA, to get into that field? And so it's different. It's a little ridiculous in my mind, but in a way it makes sense, because it's so specialized that, if you want to study medicine, if you want to study architecture, engineering, you have to have a higher GPA to get into that program than if you want to study other subjects. And so, yeah, to your initial question, Jordan, the hyper specializing is happening in undergrad. There were students on campus that lived on campus. It was mostly folks that came from out of town, farther out of town. But even they usually didn't live in dorms. They usually lived in the city, and oftentimes just live their own life. There's no club sports, right? Like any kind of there's no college sports, anything that keeps that together. It's just all club, and that's what I did. That's why I stayed in my hometown to play for my club. And there's not really this college cultural identity. I have like 5 Hillsdale hoodies. I don't even know if we had any Saarland University swag. It's just, you don't really identify with your school. But I think the main reason is that you don't look at it as pursuing something noble, something higher with your peers. It's just, I do this for myself, right? So that I can get a piece of paper that allows me to teach children. And so I don't have any friends, from my time there. And I was there for almost 3 years. But it was, looking back, it's really sad. And Hillsdale, of course, was the complete opposite. And for a while, I thought, oh, that's what American college is. But come to learn, no, it's actually not. Hillsdale is is unique in that with some schools like Benedictine and Franciscan and Christendom and others, and that the majority of American universities are pretty much now like my experience was in Germany.
Yeah, it's really amazing to think that jump to Hillsdale, which you almost selected it randomly. I mean, you had your reasonings behind it. You didn't realize you were jumping into sort of a movement, which you're actually a part of now, a big part of this movement. The CLT is front and center, and we've had Jeremy Tate here on this podcast, and he talks about he wants to pick a fight with the big boys out there, and so you really grew into this this opportunity that we're a part of here at Kolbe as well. Can you talk a little bit about your like day to day with that? What are you guys up to over there, and especially your role?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I was a teacher at Vanguard. And so I was teaching mostly English literature, and I did some German because, I'm German. So they made me start a German program there, which was amazing, but and some history as well. And so I was first exposed to standardized testing because we don't have standardized tests in Germany, which is now, of course, I'm vice president of partnerships at a standardized testing company. I've never taken a standardized test, the irony there. But at least I saw the influence of the testing when I was there. At the same time, I was getting a master's degree in education from Colorado Christian, and I learned a lot about standards. At that point, you probably heard of those Common Core standards. That was 2015, around that time, 2013, 14, 15, when they were kind of pushed down into the school. So I kind of learned about standardized testing, and then I saw firsthand as a teacher and later administrator, kind of the power that standardized tests have over students, schools, families, and that really made me take a deep dive into the history of standardized testing, and really look for alternatives. Which, of course, as you mentioned, my boss Jeremy Tate was already during that time, finding a solution for what I considered a huge problem in education that no one seemed to be talking about, and that was testing. And so 2018, I connected with Mr. Tate. I think it was, I don't even know how I connected. I think it was through someone that worked at CLT. I was connected with him on LinkedIn, and I saw he works for Classic Learning Test. I'm like, oh, I wonder what that is. So I connected with him, and a day later I was on the phone with Jeremy. And if you know anything about Jeremy, I mean, he's a visionary. He is incredibly charismatic. He's so passionate. He's a strong believer, and just an amazing guy. And so it didn't take me long to be convinced that he's on to something, even though CLT was still pretty small at that point. And so my now wife and I took kind of leap of faith and moved from Colorado Springs to the East Coast to Annapolis, Maryland in 2018. And I started at first, CLT was never really conceived, well, first of all, as a company. It was just an idea at first, right? And then it was never really conceived as a business to business, so to speak. It was just early on, it was, hey, we have a test. You can take it online, and you can go to like a test site or something, and you can sign up through the website, and it's really just for families, considered direct to consumer. But Jeremy really early on, and probably a little bit talking to me too, in my experience at a school, that we can actually solve the problem for schools as well. And so 2018, I was hired as I think it was director of secondary schools, and really to help build out a plan to serve our schools more. And at that point, we just started our third test, the CLT-8. So then we just had the CLT-8, CLT-10, and the CLT. So really a suite for 7th through 12th grade. And so now it's 2023, and I'm now serve as the vice president of partnerships, which essentially is VP of sales and marketing. So I lead the sales team and the marketing team, and kind of coordinate and set strategy for that. And of course, still get to visit a lot of schools and connect with homeschool leaders and all the fun things. But now we have a fairly large team in the sales and marketing as well.
Yeah, we've gotten to talk to Jeremy Tate and also Kimberly Farley. She was on episode 127. We will link both those episodes in our show notes. You were mentioning that you now have testing for younger grades too. Would you tell us more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I like to say in an ideal world, right, there'd be no need for CLT. Is it Federalist 51? If all men were angels, right, there'd be no need for government. And here we are. We're not. And so I think the interesting thing about CLT too is that I don't think anyone at CLT is here because we absolutely love testing and that's all we want to talk about and do, right? It's really this part of this larger movement, like you said earlier, Bonnie. And so, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we started with the college entrance exam because Jeremy liked to say, I want to pick a fight with College Board because he saw that students don't want to take anything that doesn't get them either 5 points on the AP or a higher SAT score. And so, these quote unquote useless things like theology and history and philosophy, right? Well, if they don't get you anything, if you're a 16-year-old and everything around you says utilitarian, then that's a problem, right? And so we started with that, and then we went down to 9th and 10th grade, and then 7th and 8th grade. But really, the last 3 or 4 years, I mean, almost every conversation I have, whether it's with a school leader or with a homeschool co-op or a homeschool leader, they say, yeah, that's great, and we love that you do that, but also we need tests for the grammar school, because that's really, really, really where we're struggling. And I think part of it is, I like to sometimes think of testing like meetings, right? People say, oh, I hate meetings. No, I don't think people hate meetings. I think we hate bad meetings. We hate meetings that we feel like are a waste of time, that don't really apply to us. We hate those meetings. And I think testing is very similar. We don't like testing that we feel like compromises our convictions. We don't like testing that we feel like, does not align with our educational philosophy or with the content or the curriculum that we teach. That kind of testing is bad. Well, it's not only a waste of time, however long it takes, and most standardized tests take several hours or sometimes, over several days, but they also don't really give us any useful feedback or information. And that's really in the lower grades what the parents want. I mean, homeschooling is hard. And I'm sure a lot of homeschool moms and dads have doubts, like, am I doing this right? Mm-hmm. I mean, my child is wonderful and they seem to be doing well, but I want some objective measure on if we're doing a good job or if there's anything that we can adjust. And so now then you take a test like the Iowa or the Stanford, the Terra Nova, or the MAP testing that are aligned with kind of standards with which you do not agree, certainly with which you don't follow. And so then it feels like a compromise, right? But you, in a way, still have to or want to validate that what you're doing is good, or the state makes you, right? If you're in a state that actually has end of year requirements. And so we made the decision, and we certainly didn't take it lightly. I mean, it's a big undertaking to go lower in grades, but we made the call last year, and our test development team has been really, really busy, and so we're developing a CLT3, CLT4, CLT5, and CLT6, so 4 brand new assessments for those grades, and then of course on top of the ones for 7th through 12th grade that we already have, and so we are very, very excited about it. I think it's necessary. It's required. I think there's a lot right now going on in standardized testing that is going in a direction, let's say, of the culture, and certainly not the one that we want to be part of. And so maybe we can talk about that later. But there's certainly a lot of concern right now about the direction of testing, and I think the timing could not be better for us to go into the grammar school assessments. And so I think everyone has an agenda, right? Everyone has some kind of ideological bent. Every testing company does. Ours just happens to be truth, goodness, and beauty. And I think that really sets us apart from the other testing regimes. Yeah,
I think it was unexpected that there would be this kind of pushback. So Jeremy, like, recognizing this kind of blind spot, there's a pushback there. Even with the Newman guide, colleges, Stephen and I were talking off air before about how he was kind of plopped into this movement also, and may not have expected that. And I want to get Stephen involved in the conversation as well. But I wanted to ask you about. So you have to start somewhere, and then you expand up and down maybe. But what about geographically? I was teaching homeschoolers online in Germany, which almost felt like it was illegal. I almost felt like, what, could I get in trouble for this? Of course not. I'm teaching them in America and other countries, not Germany. But what about the international opportunity to bring liberal arts and classic books and this kind of education? Are you guys looking at that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. I wouldn't say we're actively looking, even though, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. It certain kind of organically has happened. We're still, even though I'm sure a lot of your listeners have been hearing about CLT now for a while, but we're still comparatively small, right? And there's a lot even in the US that we need to a lot of ground to cover, and so we haven't had necessarily an international strategy per se. But I think we talked about this renewal movement. It's happening, and it's happening all over the world. Certainly in some countries it's harder than others. You mentioned Germany, right, Jordan? But there's absolutely a renewal movement in South America, and so lots of especially Catholic liberal arts schools in Colombia is one that has, I think, percentage-wise, one of the largest. Brazil, certainly. Asia, we have several partners in South Korea, in China, that bring classical Christian education, and some of those are kind of missionaries, right, that work with American students there. But we're also working with schools that are where English is the second language. There's a wonderful school, Korea Liberal Arts Academy, I think the name is. And English is a second language, and they're providing this beautiful liberal arts education, and we're able to serve them with our tests. There is a renewal movement happening in Australia, which is fascinating. Right now I'm coordinating a meeting with a gentleman who's involved there, and with the time difference, I think it's like a 16-hour time difference. It's quite challenging to not have it be in the middle of the night for either of us. But there's a hunger for this, and I was just connected to a school in Germany, Jordan, a classical Christian school that's opening in Germany, and so I think we're really seeing it across the world. Not all of them might be calling it classical. Some might be calling it liberal arts, or they might not be calling it anything, just good education. But it's certainly a rejection of progressive education that's been unfortunately sweeping this country.
Yeah, I'm going to jump back just a little bit to when you're talking about developing the test for the younger kids and things. And I realize, as you're saying, CLT is still relatively small. But I hadn't really thought about how the influence that a standardized test can have on the direction of education, especially, I mean, because if you put a number to success, it's just human nature to say, I want to be successful. This is what's being rewarded. So if that means I need to teach to these tests, which are full of principles that I disagree with, it doesn't really matter. It does matter, but it's hard, I think, to keep from seeking the success, to wanting to win the game, essentially. So it's very refreshing to me, even if not every school in the country yet uses the CLT, but that for schools that want to pursue real education, there's a way to see how you're doing that doesn't force you to pursue an education that you fundamentally disagree with. So for one, I'm really excited about CLT and what they're doing.
Well, I appreciate that, Stephen. Yeah, I think, and especially in Catholic schools, we've seen that. I mean, I think part of the growth in Catholic homeschooling is a rejection, not just of public schools. It's a rejection of kind of your mainstream Catholic K-12 schools that really don't look much different from the public schools. And I think part of it, unfortunately, is the standards and the assessments. If you visit a more progressive Catholic school, I think they're now the majority, unfortunately. I mean, some of these schools are owned by College Board. They define themselves through the number of National Merit Scholars they have, and the AP scholars they have, and the average SAT score, and then getting kids into the big public research universities. I mean, that's kind of their sense of pride. Well, if that's all over your marketing, right? If that's what you pride yourself on, well, that's what families will want, right? And so they don't come for the Catholic identity, for the formation that we discussed earlier. They come for the quote unquote worldly things. And so that puts a school in a really tough position, right? Because now that's being demanded of the school. And so what do? You're at that crossroads, right? Do I double down on identity, do I keep teaching in these beautiful introduction to philosophy and theology classes that are so important to our Catholic faith? Or, well, but the families want that extra AP class because it might give them some college credit so that they can get ahead. And unfortunately, we've been seeing that the latter has kind of taken over. I think the test is part of it. Because when you think about it, I mean, I think we just got past a school choice week, right? A lot of folks talk about school choice. And, in general, CLT aligns itself with school choice. I mean, we think the parents are the primary educators and they should have a say in where their kids go to school. The school shouldn't be determined by their zip code, and so forth. But I would argue that when you think about it, can there really be school choice if there's no assessment choice? Because ultimately, you're always going to be beholden to some standard, to some metric, to some measure in order to validate to the world, right? To your, whatever it is, your accreditor, your homeschool provider, the state. You always have to show that you're successful. Now, as classical educators, we know that the true value and benefit and goal of a classical education is not a number. It's the impact it has on your soul, on your heart, on your mind. But it's hard to measure that, right? It's not as tangible. You can't really put that on the website. What you can put on the website are numbers, and families understand those. And so I think that's the problem we're trying to solve with CLT. And so on the one hand, we get criticized, well, why are you trying to solve a problem by just adding to the problem, by creating another test? But I think when you think about the kind of test and what we're trying to do, I like to think of it as most standardized tests, right, that need to be studied for, right? The curriculum needs to be changed in order to adjust to the test. And the way we think of CLT is the test should point back to the homeschool family, should point back to the school, so that we're not driving it. We're being able to validate and complement it. I think that's the biggest difference. And I think the last 10, 15 years, that's kind of been standing in the way to even more growth, especially on the Catholic school and homeschool side. So all that to say that's the problem we're trying to solve through the same thing, right? Through assessment, but just one that we think is better and ultimately I think is going to help homeschool families better validate and demonstrate all the great work they're doing.
Yeah, I remember probably 15 years ago or so, working in the homeschooling groups. So this is kind of connected, I guess, where we kind of had to be clever as serpents because we had confidence in the education, the general curriculum we were providing, and the fantastic job that these parents were doing in educating their children. But other people outside of the organization, outside of homeschooling, didn't understand that. And so to a large extent, for us at that point, it was converting, like, okay, yeah, we're not going to do what they do over there in the school, but how can we relay that, yes, we're checking these boxes off. And, so I can kind of see, well, hopefully, clever as serpents, the CLT will allow more schools to kind of switch over to that, to do what's good, because now they've got tests that say, yes, we're successful. We're doing this, and we can now get into these schools or whatever with these things. There's a justification to make the switch, which is fantastic.
Yeah. I'm not a doomsday kind of person, but I think what you're also going to be seeing, I don't know if it's this year or next year, but in 2020 with COVID and then 2021, it certainly kind of it got parents more involved. Let's put it that way, right? Whether they wanted to or they had to, but they started to pay more attention. And of course, we know the images of the school boards, right? And parents actually getting involved and demanding more transparency when it comes to curriculum, because maybe some of them for the first time realized the problematic content that some of these schools were teaching, right? And some of the methods. It's good, right? We should have that kind of transparency. And then, of course, we believe at CLT, at least, we believe that parents are the primary educators, even though you can get canceled for that these days. I think 2023, 2024 might be the year where parents are going to look more closely at the assessments that their students are taking. Because for the longest time, I think it was just that thing that you do. And Stephen, you mentioned a little bit, right? It's like you kind of have to, right? You kind of have to play the game. And you know what? For a long time, I mean, you didn't have the strength in numbers as a homeschool movement either yet, right? It's like, well, we're kind of on the fringe here. We kind of have that reputation anyway, so let's just play the game, be the clever serpent, show them what they need to see, and continue to do our own thing. But I think we're getting to a point where these big testing companies, I mean, they're pretty progressive. I think that's no secret. And at CLT, we've always tried to not get into kind of throwing shade on other companies, right? Or just saying, oh, look how bad they are. We get a lot of that in politics, right? We don't need that in testing, you know. But at the same time, I think it's important for families to know how different we are from other tests. And I think a lot of families are not aware. And I think some of them still think that, oh, the SAT is what it used to be in the 70s and 80s. And by golly, it's not at all. Well, now we're hearing companies like NWEA, which does the MAP testing, and I think it's in 84 Catholic dioceses, hundreds and hundreds of schools. And I mean, you can't be surprised that these companies are progressive. Almost all major companies are, but it impacts what those kids are reading. And so if you go on CLT and you look at our author bank, you know, you see everything from Catherine of Siena and Thomas Aquinas, you know, all the way up to Flannery O'Connor. And I'm looking at kind of the reading recommendations, and let's put it this way: they have an agenda. Now they are a secular company, and they can do that, right? They can recommend to kindergartners. I don't even know something about drag queens. I read that the other day. They can do that, but families should know about it at least, right? And schools should know about it at least. I think that's going to be if they're that open about it on their website. Can't even imagine what they put on their tests, even though they say, oh, no, we don't. But as a former teacher who administered tests, they always told us, well, don't look at the test for test validity. Don't look at the test. You know, you shouldn't. Like, well, but if you put in that on the website, I kind of have a right to know what you're putting in front of my students, because tests are pedagogical, right? I mean, tests teach. And so we just released a CLT3 sample, and, you know, it has the Prince and the Pauper and the Wind and the Willows, and just beautiful, beautiful literature and fairy tales that families can be confident in, that their students are reading beautiful passages. I just think we can't be certain anymore that other testing companies that used to say they're values neutral are still that. And so again, this is of course the choice of the family, the choice of the school. But I think this year in particular, families will pay a little bit closer attention, at least, on what their kids are exposed to.
Yeah, even before COVID, for education as a whole, I mean, I'm a little sheltered because I've been in classical education now for like 16, 17 years, and then went through TAC and was immersed in that prior to that. But it seems to me that there's a real, I mean, it's gaining ground, at least in Newman Guide schools, Catholic schools that I'm seeing. There's a desire for, even if people don't understand what classical means necessarily, they want something better. They want something that's worthwhile in itself. And so for me, all of that kind of started back in the late 60s from my perspective, because I'm on the TAC sort of channel there, and then it's all Catholic as well. So I'm curious, from your perspective at CLT, is that what you're seeing too? Is it across the board with all Christians, people outside the church, as it were, other things? Is it growing as a whole, or what does it look like out there?
Yeah, I think it's really, really encouraging. And in a way, CLT has kind of played the role of the great convener of all the different pockets of classical and liberal arts education as in a way, a nexus point, right? As something that we don't want to rally around a test per se, but at least around a standard that we can all agree with. And so Jeremy has done a fantastic job kind of bringing together a board of academic advisors. And when you look at that board, we have a list and on our website, cltexam.com. But yeah, there are folks on the Catholic side. There's college presidents. There's leaders in Michael Van Hecke from the Institute for Catholic Liberal Education, right? And so you certainly have that kind of growth on the Catholic side, where I think ICLE schools are now close to 200 now, which is fantastic. I know Kolbe, I mean, your enrollment has grown significantly, and I think a lot of the other Catholic homeschool groups have as well. You see tremendous tremendous growth on the Catholic Christian, the classical Christian side. I think they're a little bit ahead of the Catholics in that regard. Now, I know the Catholic Church is slow moving, and that's good. And you have, of course, such rich tradition where there's not as many new Catholic schools that start. There are some. The Chesterton academies are certainly an exception. They're starting all these new, but high school only. I think they're going to be up to 63 schools this fall from 47 just last year, which I think was 18 more than the years before. But on the Catholic school side, we're seeing more a converting, so to speak, of really failing progressive Catholic schools being infused with a spark of classical or liberal arts. And it takes a while. That's difficult to do. It's a little bit, in a way, a little bit quicker if you can just start from scratch. And that's what a lot of the classical Christian schools are doing. So I think the Association of Classical Christian Schools, I think they're up to 470 schools now, and they grew by almost 100, I think, just last year. Almost 100 new schools, most of them K6. So they're still pretty bottom heavy, right? And so that movement is growing as well. And then on the secular side, there's a growing movement of charter schools, of classical charter schools, and of course they're kind of the first benefactors, or one of the main benefactors of the early kind of school choice legislation. And so you have organizations like Hillsdale College that is opening classical charter schools left and right, I want to say, but more so you have the Founders Classical Schools in Texas and Arkansas. I think they're up to 23 or 24 schools. And so I think across the board, you're seeing a return to liberal arts classical education. But it seems like we now also have the infrastructure, the organizations that support that, where maybe 20, 30 years ago, it would almost seem impossible, and you would feel completely on your own to do any of that. Maybe similar to homeschooling, right? There are not many resources that of course there are now. It is happening, and there's wait lists all over the place. There's interest forms being filled out to open new schools. I think parents are just, like you said, they're fed up with the failure of education. I think they're fed up with their children being treated like guinea pigs. Just the latest Department of Ed research, and I think the politicians have woken up to it. They're still politicians, so I don't know if it's because of the goodness of their heart or if they just realize that this is a winning message. Either way, a lot of governors have gotten involved, right? A lot of senators have gotten involved with kind of the same language of parents are the primary educators, and we need to empower parents to make their own choices when it comes to education. So I think everything is really encouraging. And maybe you can link that in the show notes as well. But Jeremy Tate, our founder, he recently published a piece in First Things about that explosive growth in K-12 education that outlines a lot of what I just said. It's a really thoughtful piece, and so certainly encouraging. And I think it's just going to continue. That movement is just going to continue to grow.
We kind of feel like it's an inevitable victory as long as we can maintain the momentum, right? I mean, because the quality of education that you're talking about with the classical education compared with, as you were saying earlier, the way everything is trending, it's just undeniable. And it's interesting because it's absolutely contrasting against kind of the stranglehold that the educational institutions have had on the formation of, in my opinion, of students now for decades and decades. And I think, they've created a culture where you don't think. You've been indoctrinated with the religion, the modern religion, and that's what you're talking about. But these new students, whether they end up agreeing with that for whatever reasons that are logical, poor reasoning, or thinking for themselves and being able to make continual improvements, continually look at things, continually grow things, I think it's, unless there's something that stomps us out, I think it's an inevitable victory.
I think so too. And ultimately, once you come for children, I mean, that's really, some of this toxic ideology has been out there for a while, right? But it's mostly been on the university level. I mean, you talk about critical theory. It's not like it's new. It just hasn't really made it into K-12 until just a few years ago. And I think that's where parents are just, and and by the way, we are not talking about just conservative parents or just Christian parents. And I think that's something that it's always going to be portrayed as that, right? Classical education is just for, elitists, and it's just for whites, and it's just for Republicans. It's really, really not the case. And so don't be fooled by maybe social media or whatnot. And to illustrate that a little bit, I can tell you a quick story. I was in Vermont for Christmas because White Christmas is one of my favorite movies. And so my wife and I thought, well, why not go up to, Vermont and actually have White Christmas? And so Vermont politically is, I think we can agree, it's fairly liberal, fairly blue state. And we were sitting at a brewery, as a good German does, a few days after Christmas, and there was a couple next to us, and I don't even know how we got to talk about education. I mean, my wife will say, well, it's because you always find a way to talk about education. But we got to the topic of education, and we didn't really talk about politics. I could tell by some of the conversation before and after that the lady was she was pretty liberal, but she told us she has an 8-year-old, a 9-year-old, and she said she's going to pull her daughter from public schools. And we got talking. I said, oh, but what made you make that decision? And she said, well, I want my kid to be able to read and write, not to be an activist. And that was really interesting. Again, coming from someone who's politically, on the left. And it was interesting because a few sentences later, she said, don't get me wrong, I want them to be an activist down the road, but they have to be able to read and write first. If they can't even read or write, how are they going to know anything, right? And so I really think that it's now more than just this political left and right. It's, we're talking about children. We're talking about a completely failed education system that, by all metrics and measures, is failing. And I think parents are waking up. I think the challenge for our classical movement is to make sure that, for lack of a better word, everyone feels welcome to join, right? Of course, we have a certain way we want to teach, and we have certain ideas about the human person, but it's so much broader as well. And so, folks that don't want to be indoctrinated, like you said, Stephen, at school, that don't believe in this progressive, again, ideology in school. They might have their personal beliefs, but in school, it doesn't believe in the school. We're gonna join forces, and I think it's going to sweep the country. So I'm really, really hopeful. There are challenges still, right? But I'm very hopeful that this beautiful education is going to continue to thrive. And ultimately, it's about human formation, right? It's about cultivating joy and wonder, and nothing else. And I think that's a message that we can share, not just with our Christian brothers and sisters, but beyond.
I have found both the CLT website and the Anchored podcast very helpful in delving more deeply into the topics, many of which you've touched upon today, and sort of getting a fuller picture of what it means to say the classical movement, or some of the things you're referring to now, the progressive movement as well. And I have been grateful for our Kolbe education, how those of us who don't have that background ourselves are able to learn along with our students. This has been such a great conversation. As I mentioned, we have some Kolbecast episodes that relate to this conversation we've had today. They are episode 120 with Jeremy Tate, the founder of CLT. Also episode 127, Forging a Path, with CLT's Director of Homeschool Partnerships, Kimberly Farley. And episode 83, This is Only a Test, with our own Maggie Hayden and John and Chris Bates. So check the show notes for links to those episodes. All right, Soren, do you have any final thoughts or takeaways you want to leave with our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, I would love if you're listening to this and you thought, I never thought about assessment much or about testing. I think, like Bonnie said, the Anchored podcast is a really, really good resource. Just listening to what's going on in the movement, right? Mm-hmm. And maybe learning about some colleges you haven't heard about, or some interesting topics related to school choice, whatever it might be. But also come to our website, and there's actually a page now about the grammar school testing. And so maybe you're a parent of a 3rd, 4th, 5th, or 6th grader, or maybe younger and or older. But we have a sample test on the website, a sample CLT3, just to look at it, look at the beauty of the passages, the art that is on the test. I think it's something that, testing has always been seen as this thing that is completely removed from our day-to-day experience, either in the classroom or at home, and we want to bridge that gap. And so just take a look, and of course, any questions you might have. We are small enough of a company that we can actually talk to parents, talk to educators, talk to folks, and have a conversation, and and listen to their concerns and provide advice. So please reach out to us. We'd love to partner with you all.
It's been great meeting you today, Soren. Thanks so much for coming to visit with us.
Thanks, everyone.
Subscribe to the Kolbecast on your favorite podcast app so that you don't miss an episode. And let us know how we're doing by leaving a rating or a review. And as always, feel free to email us at podcast@kolbe.org.
Mary our Mother, pray for us. St. Maximilian Kolbe, pray for us. Ad Maiorem Dei Gloriam.